It was like this pure white diamond light frequency. And there, as I said, there was this presence, and it wasn't so much a defined presence. There was a presence in the light, made up of the light, as the light, yet distinct from the light. And it was like I put my forehead. It's like if you put your forehead to someone else's forehead, and instantly you knew everything there was to know about that person, and all the nuances, and every dimension of their life, and in a holographic way. It felt like that. And I knew that this presence was there to show me, to teach me, to guide me, to answer questions.
I'm here today with Felice DiMartino, who in 2015 had a near-death experience as a result of getting hit by a large pickup truck as she was crossing the street. Felice, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really blessed to have you here with me.
Likewise, Tia. It's truly an honor to be here with you and with everyone watching. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
And so in 2015, you were going to cross the street and got a sudden surprise, I want to say.
Yeah.
More than that. And you were hit and you had a near-death experience. Tell me about what happened.
So it was December 2nd, 2015, and I was at work. I had been a preschool teacher in a Montessori school and for many years, and I left work at the end of the school day to walk to my car. And my car was parked in a lot that was off of school grounds. And to get to my car, I had to cross a busy crosswalk. And the light, when I had the right of way, I had done this walk hundreds of times before over my many years of working at the school. I waited for the light to give me the right of way to cross, and I proceeded to cross the street. And up from behind me, making a left-hand turn, was a large pickup truck, and it hit me on my right-hand side going about 30-35 miles an hour. It turns out she sped up to make the left-hand turn before an oncoming car came. So the right side of my body was struck, and on the impact, the last thought I had, it turns out, which came to me later, was something's not right. And the next thing I knew, I was above my body, looking down at the scene. I had a bird's eye view. I had peripherally, I could see 360 degrees around me, although there was as if there was a spotlight on what was going on below. I could hear. And when I'm saying I could see and hear, it wasn't with our physical practiced senses. It was with I could see, but with a different kind of sight, with a different sensation of sight. I could see, I could hear, I could feel, I could see the woman. There was two women there and a man, and one woman crossed the street to go direct traffic. So I was viewing the whole scene laid out below me, and I was able to feel the terror and the sheer horror of the people that were on the ground. There was one person was being very grounded, pragmatic, practical. The girl who hit me was in panic, and the other woman was listening to the directions to go across and stop the traffic. And there was a period of an assessment of if I was going to be able to go back there. I realized that I was existing as this full awareness, yet my body was completely still and motionless. And it looked like it was in one piece. I didn't get so specific to see what was going internally. There was a lot going on with broken bones, and I was bleeding out from my pelvis. So I wasn't focused on that. It was, am I going to be able to go back there? Right. There was a sense of disorientation, and then a sense of assessing what was going on. And when I asked the question, am I going to be able to go back? I understood that I would be able to go back. And part of that was in an instant, this emergence of my kids. I had just come through a difficult period in my life, and my kids, who I was in the midst of empty nesting. So my kids had gone off to college and were out of the house, yet there was this draw and this pull, like I'm not done with them. We're healing from all this stuff that I had just gone through, and we had just gone through. And so I knew I would be able, if I wanted to, and if I chose to, and that I could go back. And in that moment, it was, I'm going back. It was like an understanding that I would be able to go back, and that I would be going back at that time. That was my choice at that time. And the next thing was I was lifting. It felt as though I was lifting higher and higher and higher, and the scene below me began to fade. And it was like I've used this analogy before. It's like when you boil water, right? And the steam rises and the water depletes. It kind of felt like that, like the life force energy in the body was diminishing as the steam, as more of me and as my consciousness and as who I truly am and was existing as was getting more infused with energy and vitality as the life force was slowly shutting down. And I was immersed in complete blackness. And I call this place of illuminated blackness, because this blackness had there was an illuminating quality to the blackness, yet the blackness was the blackest black that you can even imagine, like blacker than black. I don't, using words to describe these experiences. And in the blackness, there was no me, there was no I. It was expansive, it was timeless, it was directionless. It simply was existing as the blackness. The I, again, there was no separation of I and the blackness. I was simply merged into this expansive, illuminated blackness that was everything and nothing at the same time. And there was a simply being in and as the blackness. And this, I give it qualities now with words to aim to, I don't want to even say make sense, because all of this is beyond earthbound language and logic. It's simply existing in one with this field of oneness, with this expanse. And at some point, there was a shift in like a frequency. There was a shift in a tone of the blackness, and it was still black, yet there was a shift in a vibration. And I found myself still in this blackness, yet this blackness had a different quality to it. And it felt, and I was aware of existing in a cocoon of sorts. And that's when there wasn't more of a sense of an I. And I was in this cocoon, and I was aware in my periphery that there were others that were also in cocoons. It was like floating in a cocoon, yet there were others, yet we were all made up of the same material, if you will. And there was nuances to that, yet I was aware in my periphery. And there was an understanding and a knowing that this was some kind of a waiting place. And from that knowing, there was a sense of, well, if this is a waiting place, and there was no fear, there was no worry, there was no even questioning as we have questions, or there was no emotions in this place. There was a simple of, well, if I'm waiting, the question arose, but it was more like an energy packet that started to build up. And there was a pop that of this wondering, I'll call it. It was a wondering of, well, what is the waiting for? Like, if this is a waiting, what is a waiting for? And again, we say that this is a thought or a question. It emerged as an energy packet, and infused in the energy packet was this wondering of, what am I waiting for? And immediately, as this wondering culminated, I was met with what the waiting was for. And there was this effulgence of light. And this light, in the light, there was a presence that was other than my own, yet that was also merged in with the aspect of me that I was existing as. And it was like this pure white diamond light frequency. And there, as I said, there was this presence, and it wasn't so much a defined presence. There was a presence in the light, made up of the light, as the light, yet distinct from the light. And it was like I put my forehead. It's like if you put your forehead to someone else's forehead, and instantly you knew everything there was to know about that person, and all the nuances, and every dimension of their life, and in a holographic way. It felt like that. And I knew that this presence was there to show me, to teach me, to guide me, to answer questions. And it felt as though, again, my forehead was to this presence, to the forehead of the presence, even though I didn't have a forehead. It's just the sensation of these downloads and these uploads. And I understood everything that was happening in my soul's journey up until that point. I understood everything that was occurring on earth in my life that I had just been experiencing up until that point, in a multifaceted way. And at some point, so these downloads and uploads were occurring. And at some point, there was an urgency started to build, that if I was going to go back into the body, I needed to go then. Like, my body was shutting down. And if I was going back, I needed to go. So as that built up, I heard, when you go back, it's time to live big. Like, as clear as I'm speaking to you now is how it sounded. Yet it wasn't just sound, it was infused with a multi expansive dimensional understanding of what that meant. When you go back, it's time to live big. And again, infused in that is the understanding and the activated knowing of what it is that keeps us small, not in a way that the brain tries to make sense, but an understanding from a spiritual, from a soul, from a genetic, from an energetic, from the soul's eternal directive of coming to the earth, kind of a way. And I looked at the presence, and right before I started to descend, because it felt like a descent into the body, I said, "Who are you?" And I found the presence morph almost. Is that the right word? Morph. I found myself within the presence, looking back at me, saying, "I am you." And with that, I started to descend into the body. It felt like I was getting lower and lower, and I could hear and see the body. And it felt like I was being squeezed, like into an encasing, like a genie being squeezed into a bottle, or just like this kind of being fit. Even though I was existing outside as the expanse, I was hovering above my body. I heard the EMTs at some point as I was getting lower and lower towards the body. I heard the EMTs talking. It's almost like they were like calling me back and pulling me back into my body at the same time that I was descending. And I could feel myself part out of the body, part in the body as I was being squeezed in. And I could hear a yelping sound from the body, yet I wasn't feeling anything at that moment in the body. There was a simple, it's like observing from an outside perspective. And then I was in the ambulance and I was on top of the ambulance looking down, yet also in the body, aware that there was an EMT at my head. My head was bleeding profusely and they didn't know what was going on at the time. I mean, I had just been hit by this truck. So I was on the board. My head was bleeding and I could see from the top of the ambulance the EMTs talking to me. I could see and hear myself mumbling and talking as they're asking questions, but I was also, then I was pop out and be completely out on top of the ambulance. And when I was more fully in aware that I was in the body, I was in a level 1 trauma unit and there was organized chaos going on around me. So that's what happened. I broke a lot. There was a lot of broken bones. There was a lot of internal bleeding and internal swelling and staples in my head. And there was a lot to the physical structure that was going on. And yeah, I mean, I understand and I was shown what happened as I was going. It was like I went through, in the experience itself, I went through layers of remembering, right? Like all the veils were falling away from all the different vibrational windows and vibrational frequencies of forgetfulness almost. And they were all falling away and activated all of these awarenesses and senses and the forgetfulness and the veils of forgetfulness that occur when we come here to Earth. So there was that. That was how it felt, and what I was shown. And I was shown this, it's time to live big. I was shown all is truly well. And heard that and experienced that in all of my all of the senses and all of the remembering about all is truly well. And I was shown these pillars of all is truly well, meaning when I came down into embodiment again to share this way of light and the way of returning to the light and the way of accessing the light, that I was existing in that state and coming back with these ways of sharing that the way of light and the all is truly well has to do with forgiveness, compassion, gratitude, trust, surrender, faith, service, love. And
So that was an amazing story of your experience. And I think one of the main goals of spirituality in general, if not the ultimate goal, is to wake up to who we truly are. And that's what happened to you.
yeah, I had been on a spiritual path throughout my life, for the last 40 years, right? Like since I was 20, I left, I explored different cultures and spent time with indigenous elders and lived with a spiritual teacher and explored Tai Chi and more kind of, from my early 20s. And this happened when I was 49. And what this did was solidify in an embodied, it's funny to say embodied because I was so not embodied, yet coming back into a body, it felt like there was a part of me that was ejected from more of who I truly am to come back in and fill more of me. And it solidified all of the spiritual practice and the spiritual seeking and the spiritual understanding and the awakening to that there's more than this third dimensional, felt sense reality. It's solidified. I call it the knowing, like the gnosis and the capital N knowing. Like, wow, all this stuff really is the capital T truth from an experience that was And I had had spiritual experiences, and I explored in my 20s, again, many, many, many years before some plant medicine. And I had explored through meditation and through astral travel and through all these different practices. And this was the ultimate of experiences. And we have access to this. People have access to this and are waking up in the collective. There's this remembering that we can access this without having a near-death experience. And my hope is that through sharing this, it activates that good knowing, gnosis plus knowing in people, like, oh, this is actually real. This exists in a deep remembering of what we know, that we know, that we know, that we know, somewhere deep inside of us.
Are you able to hold on to that feeling, or bring that back with you and still access that higher self that you came to know?
Yes, it feels like that's my reference point, right? Right. So we have these reference points through experiences. And for me, it's like a conduit, a channel was open, was like cleared out and open. And I came back with activated senses of, especially I have this synesthesia. I don't know if you know what synesthesia is.
I
So
do, but tell my audience.
yeah, so I can see sound and hear color, and it's experience amidst other senses, and they all kind of crisscross to work together. And also within each of those senses, there's extrasensory perception of sound, of sight, of touch, of smell, of taste, and they all work together in a very multidimensional way. So it took a while for me to learn how to kind of and it wasn't actually till recently I was really able to learn how to kind of turn the dial up and turn the dial down, because it's walking through the world with activated senses and activated, we call them clairs, right? Clairvoyance, clairsentience, claircognizance. Um, and it's walking through the world now with that. So yes, I do have access. It's like that conduit has been open, and this communion. I wear this because this is kind of, I don't know if you could see it, but it's like this iridescent diamond light, white diamond light. And it's like all the facets of the diamond you can see and understand and know all at one time. It's kind of like that's how life is now. And I communicate and in communion with this, it's like this purified, clarified frequency of love and purity that comes through. And that, as an embodied human, I practice through the pillars of the all is truly well that I was shown, being in resonance with that place, right? To return and be from the heart and be from that state of love. And the reality is we're human, right? Like we're biologically, physiologically, neurologically wired, and stuff comes up. So none of this is meant as a spiritual bypass. It's meant as a remembering of what's available for us to practice and return to. Yeah.
So, speaking of that remembering, and you were discussing how everyone has access to this, what can we do? What can
Yeah.
we do to remember to kind of clear out that channel for ourselves?
Yeah. So having a practice that realigns us every day, whether it's a silent meditation, whether anytime you can get in a flow state where you're out of your rational analytical mind and come into a creative, inspirational flow. And some people that might be playing sports, some people that might be sitting down and having a quiet meditation. Uh, you can do guided imagery and visualization. I have also to share, I have a yoga nidra practice, and actually there's three practices you can access on my website, which I'll share, to bring you into a theta state, which is that state between wakefulness and sleep. It's like that liminal state when your analytical brain is turned down and your subconscious brain and your power, it's also a nervous system response. That's another, is it's more balanced and you can access peace and calm. And when you can practice accessing peace and calm, you can access more of your heart space and get out of the head and more into the heart. And there's a lot of nervous system practices so that when we can turn down our nervous system and our fight, flight, freeze response, we can be more in a heart coherence and coherence with our natural state of rest. Automatic writing. You can go sound baths and sound frequencies. Practicing self-inquiry and curiosity. Curiosity creates spaciousness, and in the spaciousness, we can really connect. And I don't mean this like curiosity, like mulling things over. It's noticing things, using the body. Our bodies are vehicles. Like, how cool is it that we are all expressions of love, of source in unique individual ways. So we are expressions of source, knowing itself. And we get to practice. We get to say, oh, that thing is really triggering me, or that person said something. I notice I'm feeling reactionary. Where am I what's my body telling me? Where am I feeling that in my body? Oh, I'm feeling that in my shoulder. Let me just sit with that and notice that. Using your body as a barometer, also grounding on the earth, because what I'm finding is, with a lot of spiritual practices, we can go out and access the transpersonal chakras, which are the higher chakras, all day long. And that's great. And we want to be careful that we're not dissociating, right? And living in a state that's out here, because we're human, we're in the earth, and there's so much to experience, right? This is a playground. This is this opportunity to learn, to grow, to evolve. So with the transpersonal chakras, it's coming back into our body to ground and embody. Like, we are on the earth. What a gift it is to have a human body. Because you never know. It's funny that saying, you could get hit by a truck tomorrow. I'm like, really? And there was a lot of trauma to the body coming back to have to work through. So writing, breath, as I say, love is the portal and breath is the bridge. Riding your breath back to center. Anytime when you have your out breaths longer than your in breaths, it settles your nervous system. You have more access to your intuition, to the voice of your soul. And the voice of your soul is the eternal place within. I hope that that's helpful.
I think it's very helpful. There's a lot. So I
So,
love how you gave so many options, because some things people struggle with and they can do other things better. So for me, meditation is difficult.
yeah.
So some of the
Yeah.
other things might be something that I can incorporate into my daily life a little easier than meditation.
Mm-hmm.
And you spoke about synesthesia. Is that kind of what your senses felt like when they were on the other side? Were they more than just single dimension senses like we have here?
Yes, thank you for asking that question. It's like there were senses off of senses. We don't even have names for the senses that exist, and that lay dormant within us. So, for example, sight is not just through the eyes. There's the inner sight, and along with the inner sight, you can hear, you can taste, you can smell, and the multidimensional experience of those senses. So there's senses other than the five that we're practiced at, that we don't, again, it's beyond space time, it's beyond our human understanding, and the ego and the mind wants to understand everything, and this exists beyond all that. So yes, there are multiple senses, and while we're embodied without having a near death experience, we can practice activating those senses, those multidimensional aspects of the senses that we're practiced at. So can I offer an example?
Please do, yes.
So like, for example, if you're, let's say you're outside in nature or anywhere, right? I'm just thinking about this because I was guiding someone through this practice the other day. Is if you're in the woods, and again, wherever you are, you could be in your house, notice the furthest thing that you can hear, and then notice the closest thing that you could hear in the room. Now, in between the furthest thing you could hear and the closest thing you could hear, there are different octaves, right? And frequencies between the closest and the furthest. So I start to practice. I guide people to start to practice that. Then we and then we practice that with sight. We practice that with taste. We practice that with all the senses, and then we practice working with all those senses all together. And off of those, in my experience, and again, I'm aiming to give this words. So just to imagine that even off of those layers of sound, there's sound off of that. And sound frequency is comprised of these. I mean, now we can get super, super out there, right? I see sound in these geometric and color frequencies, is how I can describe it. And we can practice these things. So I hope that that's helpful with the sound. You can do it with sight, because it's like having colors off of colors, shades off of shades. And you start to be able to see and hear from a soul lens or perspective or experience, which is beyond the bounds of time, space, human, tangible, how we're used to moving in the world. I hope this is making sense.
It is making sense, and
Great.
it's a different way of thinking. I've never thought about listening to the sound that's the closest versus the furthest, and vision too. So it's um, a new idea for me that I think I find very interesting.
It's like layering, right? If you imagine sounds as layers, and then off of those layers, there are layers, you can really start to fine tune. And then if you practice that, there are different ways that we practice that with sight, we practice that with touch. There are all these different ways that we tangibly practice. And then you get to kind of combine them all together. And not in an overwhelming way. You get to practice having them work all together, like as if you're one diamond experiencing all the facets of itself.
And going back to that higher self or who you truly are, and you felt like you were kind of wrapped in this cocoon. What was that cocoon, and what purpose did it serve?
It felt like I was being fully embraced in the most immense, unconditional safety and love and warmth. And there was no judgment. There was simple, pure accepting and being held. And it was like source spirit holding me as an individual signature essence of itself. Because, like I said, there were others that were floating, yet we were made of the same material, yet we each had like uh, at that point, it was more aware that I was existing as an I, separate from the illuminated blackness that I was in. Yet I was also the same as everyone else, but I was different. Again, words, right? Is It felt like being held in the pure safety of unconditional love. Like there was, and the other thing is there was no gender. Like this presence that I came into communion with, that was there for me and with me and as me, yet yet as its own. It felt very large, and it was also this loving presence. Like it had aspects that we attribute to male and female, yet it was neither, yet it was all of it at the same time. um so there was that
So
as
it
well.
wasn't, when I think of cocoon, I think of like confinement or claustrophobia. It was nothing
Mm,
like that.
no, there was nothing. It didn't feel restrictive at all. It felt almost clear. Like it felt like imagine bubbles, right? It felt like a bubble. Like there was a containment within the bubble, yet not so contained. I could still see through. It was clear. You could still, does that make sense? Like you're like I was in a bubble, yet it was also translucent. It was like it was translucent. Yeah, and like I said, there was a sense of waiting. There was a sense of knowing that there was I was in this waiting place, and it was totally comfortable. Like there was no worry, there was no fear, there was no density. And it feels also, as soon as the wondering of, well, what is this waiting for? It's that culminated, that energy packet culminated, and I was immediately met with what I was waiting for and what this waiting was for. And I have described this as the seed of the law of attraction, right? Like there was no density between the thought, I'm going to call the energy packet, between the thought, which was felt like an energy packet. There was no density or no questioning or no doubt or nothing to come between the thought and the wondering and the meeting of the wondering. There was nothing. Is that like there was no anything to come between that? There was no expectation, there was no doubt, there was no worry. It was simply, what's the wondering for? And then being met with the wondering, right? It was clean, it was clear, it was light, it was a vibration.
Would it
Yeah.
be like a knowing? Is that a good word for it? Maybe.
Well, there was a knowing that that this was a waiting, and then from that emerged this wondering of, well, huh this curiosity of, well, if this is a wait, like what is the waiting for, and being met with what the waiting was for, which was this being merged in with this presence, this pure white light. And you had asked about coming back and being able to access. It's like we all have a reference point, and that's why meditation or breath work or a practice, any practice of accessing that place within us, that voice of the soul, that becomes your reference point, because you know how that feels. You remember how that feels. That's been activated in your experience, like in your bodily experience, so you have a clearer path to get there. That's kind of how it feels. And when I came back into the body, it was hard for a while to understand and to know. I mean, I was in a lot of therapies, I was in a rehab, I had visiting nurses, I couldn't walk, I had to be able to talk again. It was a whole situation, and still there was, where does my body, this physical form, begin? Like where's the separation, where's the boundary of the body? Because it's awakened and seeing God, source, divine, everything, everywhere, in the molecules of the air, in the people, in the denser objects, right? Seeing energy atoms in a table, in a computer, whatever it is. So that took a while, and it's amazing that we can practice that. Again, you don't need to have a near death experience to recognize that. And a great practice is to see a small child in every person you interact with. Like whether you're at the checkout counter of the supermarket or wherever you are, like look at everyone and recognize the small child within. Because when you're interacting, like children are so connected with that place of source divine within them. They don't have all the traumas or all the experiences that accumulate going through life, right? That lead us further and further away from that remembering, right? So if you can come back to that innocence of the child and you can see that in people, it doesn't mean don't have boundaries as an adult, because if you're not physically, mentally, emotionally, energetically, genetically, spiritually safe, you need to have boundaries, right? That's part of being human. That's a life lesson. And you can still acknowledge the essence that exists within everyone, whether they're accessing it or not.
It's such a beautiful advice to look at people as a child, because I try that sometimes and it does make a difference, because you can see not only just their innocence, but also a place before they got angry, or I guess that would just contribute to their innocence, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, knowing a little bit, if I could share about your story, is something that I've been really aware of. Is my dad passed a few years ago, and this is with anyone who passes, and it's been this experience and this practice of relating soul to soul. Like, we come in and we take on these roles in our human incarnations, playing the parts that we've agreed and had assigned to us and agreed to play. And then we leave. And when we're freed from this human form, it's like I relate to my dad as a soul. I miss him as my dad, embodied here on earth, being my dad. And it's more like I connect with him more soul to soul. I connect with his soul, not necessarily free from who he was as my dad. Does that make sense?
It does. So your
Yeah.
dad has not truly died. He hasn't floated away, or just, he's not in oblivion. He still exists.
Yeah. Yeah, very much so, as a soul, right? It's like that soul connection.
Will you see him again?
I will see him again. I believe, and I was shown, and my experience has been, I've had two near death experiences, shared death experiences, one with my grandmother and one with my dad, is that our loved ones, and we say the other side, yet the other side exists right here, right now, also, right? It all is existing all at the same time. We are always there. We can ride the breath to connect, is that they are right in that invisible threshold waiting to receive us. Their soul essence is waiting to receive us when we cross over. I was going to say, and you can see someone again right here, right now, and practice connecting with them. You can call to them and they'll come and they'll show you through signs. And that's another meditation that I'm in the process of putting up, is connecting with your loved ones who have crossed, that anyone can do. It exists through love, and you can ride the breath to that portal of love where you are always connected.
I
Yeah.
read something recently where it said dimensions aren't locations or places, they're frequencies or vibrations and of our consciousness, and we can shift those frequencies and vibrations of our consciousness to be able to access other dimensions. So it sounds like what you're saying is just confirming what I've read recently, which is absolutely mind blowing, because you always think of the other
Yeah.
side as being somewhere else, right?
Yeah, they simply exist in a different vibratory frequency, right? Like we exist in a vibratory frequency in our bodies, and now there's so much awakening occurring on the planet and remembering occurring on the planet, that we can elevate our frequency while we're in bodies, and we can also time travel, and we can also have astral experiences, and we can also access these higher, not that there's higher, lower, we can access these vibratory states that move much quicker because there's not density, right? And I forget where I was going, that only that we exist in different vibratory frequencies, and sometimes in non-physical forms, it's like it can slow down their vibratory rate, and we can speed up our vibratory rate, and then we can perceive what is beyond perception to the senses we're practiced at. That's why it's really helpful to practice these extrasensory awarenesses, because it helps us to, with our able to perceive these non-physical realms that exist right here, right now.
Would you like to share your share death experiences that you had with your aunt and your dad?
Sure, I'm happy to share that. So it was my grandmother. So in two, yep. So in 2006, my grandmother was in hospice. She was at home. She was in hospice. And I'll cut right to the chase because there were some things that happened, right? There was a knock at the door. There was no one at the door. The hospice nurse was like, And I just kind of knew, like, there was a knock, like as loud as day, a knock. No one was there. That night, a few hours later, I was by her bed holding, she had a hospital bed in her bedroom. I was holding her hand, and it was nighttime, and my aunt and uncle had come over, and the hospice nurse was there. And my aunt got into my grandmother's bed. There was a big king size bed in the room. And I was sitting by the bed holding her hand, like sitting vigil with her. And I kept on saying, Grandma, it's okay. I felt like I was telepathically communicating with her, which I didn't mention, in the near death experience, it's all telepathic communication. Like yet it's so clear, as if someone's talking to you and showing you things. So I'm holding her hand saying, Grandma, it's okay. You can go. We're going to be okay. And I'm feeling her hovering, like I'm feeling her there, and I'm talking to her. And at some point, it's like, okay, I'm telling her she can go, but I'm holding her hand. Like, here I am. You can go, you can go. Like with my head on the bed, right? So it was time for me to let go of her hand. And I knew that when I let go, that was going to be, there's just a sense that we all have. And the hospice nurse said, when it's time, I'll let you all know. Right. So I, in my heart, I don't want to say I said goodbye, but in my heart, I released her continuing to stay in her body. And I got in bed and I closed my eyes. And I don't know how long it was after I closed my eyes. I entered into this state where I was in a ballroom and I was looking at the people in the ballroom. And they knew that I was there. And no one had any feet. They were all dressed in these like ball gowns. They were there, and I understood they were there to welcome in my grandmother. That was what was shown. So these people, and they were in youthful form, and they were also, I say they were old relatives. They were like ancestors and old relatives, but they weren't old. They looked very young, and they were vibrant, and the colors that they were wearing were vibrant, and they were all floating. And at some point, there was an aisle that was formed down the center, and they started to part. And I felt my grandfather's presence with two other presences, these angelic presences of light. And they started to walk up. At some point, I felt my grandfather's and this other presence, just the one presence. They started to walk up this aisle. And as they walked up, there was a parting. The people, the attendees parted, and there was excitement that built. And as they got to the top of the aisle, there was a reaching down. My grandfather was right there. His presence was right there. And this angelic presence, there was a reaching down. And as soon as there was a reaching down, I heard, get up now. And I shot up out of the bed and I looked around. It was like a split second, like faster than we have time for. And everyone, the hospice nurse was asleep. My aunt, everyone was asleep. And I looked at my grandmother and her eyes were wide open and she was taking her final breaths. So there was that experience. There was a moment, it was very clear, like the energy was so clear. And it was like the portal was open and the gate was open and she was leaving. It was like this very clear opening. And as soon as that hand said, it's time to get up now, and was reaching down. Okay, so that happened and that occurred. I'm going to fast forward now a few years, or not a few years ago, my dad passed. And as many people report, what we experienced with my dad is the day that he passed, he was pointing to the corner of the room. We were at home, the hospice was there, the family was there. He kept on pointing to the corner of the room, to the left corner of the room, and then he would like shake back in his body and look at us. And because I had my own near-death experience, I was able to say, Daddy, it's okay. Your body is here. You're going to be okay. We're okay. And every time he would point and then come back, I was just being with him in this space of as much as I could, comforting him, right? Because he would leave and then he would come back and he's pointing. And at some point throughout the day, there was some inaudible, I don't want to say mumbling, but there was some sounds and words being said as he was pointing, and we couldn't understand him. And then he started reaching. I mean, you can't really see me now, but the pointing went to like a reaching to the corner. And time went on. Well, not that much time, but eventually it was time. He left, and I could feel him and see him, and from his vantage point with him, looking down at all of us. We were around his body, holding hands. And and this is called bilocation, when you exist in two places at one time, not in a dissociative way. I'm not talking about dissociation. I'm talking about fully existing and aware that you are existing in your body and fully there, and also fully somewhere else. I say fully, but you're aware that you're existing in both these places. And I was with him, feeling him in the room, seeing from his vantage point, and also very much holding this space and this circle around his body, saying, Daddy, we know you can hear us, because that's from my own experience. I know you could hear and you could see everything, right? Like a spotlight, you could see everything that's going on and hear everything. So I said, Daddy, I know you could see us, you could hear us. We're going to be okay. You're going to go off to soul school. And also before he left, I did say, I said, Daddy, it's okay. They're here to help. They're going to help you cross over. I named all of our relatives and his parents who had crossed. Although he was already with them, like letting him know that we were aware of what was occurring, right? So in that moment, we held hands. I said, you're going to go off, and if and when you want to come back and visit us, we're here. And that's what occurred. And for me, what that was the circle of love, right? Having experienced that with my grandmother, of this angelic presence reaching down as if with a hand to help my grandmother reach up and cross over. And then on this side, on the very physical side, experiencing my dad pointing and then reaching up. It was like this reaching down and reaching up, right? So like being welcomed into, that's what it's, this circle of love. It's like on this side, ushering from the state of love, and on the other side, being received into love. So when you ask if I'll see him again, having had this experience, this very visceral experience with my grandmother, and in my own understanding, yes. And in my own experience, yes. And in my near-death experience, I was hit by that truck, right? Like it happened, because sometimes we don't always get to prepare for a loved one's crossing. It happens tragically or in an accident, or we're not bedside vigil with them, right? And we're all still received into the arms of love and into the arms of our loved ones who are on the other side. So being able to, why we're here when we do have the opportunity to usher someone off from the state of love, it's such a gift. It's like, again, I use the word portal because it's a passageway and it's a sacred passageway. You know, it's like birthing. It's like being birthed into this non-physical realm, just like we're birthed into the physical realm at birth. So that's what happened.
Not only a gift for us, but a gift for them too, I think.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
What a beautiful life you've had, even though, those beautiful experiences are around things that are typically looked at as very sad and traumatic. And not that they were easy for you, but they were also beautiful as well. So thank you so much for sharing the most intimate experiences of your life with us today. And if my viewers wanted to reach out to you, how can they find you?
So I am at grounded illumination because we got to anchor in the light. That's what I heard before I came on this podcast. Remind them to anchor in the light. So grounded illumination. And then on Instagram, I'm at illumination activation.
And anchor in the light, that was the message that you were told to relay to
Yes.
the audience. What does that mean?
It means returning to, let's see what wants to be shared about that. Returning to the heart, returning to love, returning to the light that is who we are, that exists in every cell and molecule of our being that we forget because we get caught up in all of the stuff and all of the daily happenings of life. And practicing that love, practicing forgiveness, asking, what would love say, do, be, choose right now? And the practice of returning to that, because I know it's not always easy to do that, right? Especially when things happen that are in relationship. Still practicing that with ourselves, being loving and kind and compassionate and forgiving and non-judgmental with ourselves and giving ourselves grace and reflecting that out in the world to all of our relations and all of and the earth, the planet. Um, yeah, anchoring in the light through the choices we make, through who we be, through our human experience. Yeah.
Felice, this has been a beautiful experience for me. Thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate you so very much.
Thank you so much. I receive that and I reflect that. And you are a beautiful expression of light. And thank you so much for the work that you're doing in the world and for the conduit and channel that you be to bring this information through. And may we always remember to see the light in others, to see the light in ourselves, and that we're all reflections of each other, walking each other home, home to self here and home on the other side.
Thank you for being here. I just want to tell you how much I appreciate you being here and supporting my channel. If you haven't already subscribed, please consider subscribing if you enjoy near-death experiences and other spiritually transformative stories. It helps the algorithm know that this information is useful and push it out to more people. And that's the goal, to get as many people to know that we are eternal spiritual beings and that we never die. Our bodies might die, but our essence will never die. And I want people to live with less fear. Let's all spread the word. Like, comment, subscribe, share, hit that little notification bell so you get all the notifications when my videos post. Thank you for all of your support. I'm sending love to you.